Hello class and welcome back to Viking Guitar University. Today we have another Reaper lesson, and what today's lesson is going to cover are Reaper effects. Now go ahead and open up Reaper, and I already have a guitar line recorded here, and as you might be able to tell, it's nothing super exciting. But what we're going to do is we're going to use effects to kind of snazz it up a bit. Now, what are effects, you might be asking yourself? Effects are many things. They are everything from subtle things like little changes in EQ to more obvious things like having distortion or no distortion, or crazy delay or reverb or all that stuff. In a later lesson we're going to get into a bunch of the specific different types of effects and what each one does and how to use each one. But for now, just keep in mind it's something you can put on top of a line here and kind of change the sound of it. Now, effects as a blanket term also covers synthesizers, which are more instrument-based things. That's going to include everything from drum synthesizers to keyboard-sounding synths to, if you have a guitar-based synthesizer. But that's not something for this lesson. For this lesson, effects are just effects that we're placing on top of a sound file. So let's just take a listen to this guitar line here first, and you can kind of see what it's doing. Okay, so like I said, nothing too exciting, but we're going to snazz it up a bit, as I said. So the first question is, where do we get effects? Now, Reaper has some themselves that are actually really good, but for the purposes of this lesson, what we're going to do is go download a bundle of free effects called and I'm going to mispronounce this, but the Kierhus Audio Classic Series. Now, you can get this by going to this website up here. It's www.acoustica.com/plugins/vst-directx.htm. And if you click on the installer here, it'll download the effects. And now, at some point, it's going to ask you where you want to put those, which folder. To find out where you want to put it, go into the options in Reaper and go to Preferences. And if you scroll all the way down here under the Plugins tab, there's an option that says VST. Now, I talked about this in the first lesson, but in here you specify the path that Reaper looks in for where you put your plugins. So I've got a couple folders tossed up in here, but either select one of the ones you've already put in, or just create a new folder somewhere on your computer that you're going to be putting effects. Dump the ones you just downloaded in there, and then tell Reaper to look at that directory. Then hit OK. Now, if you just put them in here while Reaper was open, you're going to need to have Reaper scan for those effects, because when you open Reaper, it looks in that folder and then it doesn't look in it again until you tell it to. So we're going to take our track here, which I've cleverly labeled Dry Guitar 1 because there's no effects on it. We're going to go to hit this FX button here and click it. Now, this is going to bring up two windows. The first one over here on the left is kind of blank, and this is going to be the list of all of the effects that apply to this track already. So if we've already put effects in there, it's going to show them in the order. The other window over here is the Add Effects window. Now, as you can see, I've got a whole bunch because I've been doing this a while. But like I said, if Reaper was already open when you toss those in the folder, you're going to go to FX and then scan for new plugins. What that's going to do is tell Reaper to look in that folder again and update with any new effects. Now, if you have new effects, it's going to have a little option here that says new, and if you click on there, it'll show you all the ones it just installed. But another way to search through it is to just click all plugins and then type in something like that, and it'll bring up all the effects with that text string in them. One other thing I want to mention about effects right now before we close this window is you can create folders in this folders thing here, and under favorites you can keep a running list of the ones you use frequently. So even though if we look at all plugins, I've just got hundreds of plugins here, I've got a list of just a bit more than 2.5 columns of them here in my favorites, and that's just a nice way to keep track of the ones you use more frequently. So let's pull up all those Kierhus ones we just installed, and what we're going to do is click on Master Reverb, or Classic Reverb here. Click on it, then click OK. Now what that's going to do is a few things. First off, it's going to show you what the effect is, and over here in the effects for the item, it's going to show that it's there. The checkbox next to it means that it's turned on. All this stuff over here, we'll get into, actually. We'll get into this right now, by gum. The first thing you might have noticed is there's a whole bunch of knobs, and each effect is going to have a different set of knobs. Some of them are going to have different graphics or won't have any graphics, in which case you'll just get a series of sliders over here. But basically these control all the different parameters of the effect. You can play around with these as much as you want. Most effects also have a list of presets that the software developer for that effect built in, just as a way to show you some of the different things the software effect can do. And you can access those by clicking this drop-down menu here, and it will show you a bunch. Now, reverb is kind of an echoey effect. It's not a repeating echo like you would hear in a canyon where you say hello and it goes hello, hello, hello. This is more of an ambient effect where it's just kind of the general diffusion of the sound. So our presets here kind of show what that does. You know, it would be the sound of it being in a grand hall versus you know, a small club or a room. And these are just labels that the company has used for these. So we're going to open up our effect back here. If it disappears, it's just down here in the taskbar with everything else. So we've added an effect to this track, and we can change all these here as we want or choose the drop-down thing. And the one other thing I'm going to show you before we jump into actually using this effect is this knob right here. This is called the wet knob, and this is very important. It's going to probably default to 100%, and what this means is how much of the effect you want to actually apply to this guitar line here. Now, a lot of effects are going to have their own option here called mix, or something similar that lets you control the amount of the effect versus the amount of the original signal, but you also have the ability to control it through Reaper up here. So let's listen to the effect, or I'm sorry, the guitar line again without the effect. And to turn it off, we just click this tab here to uncheck it. Or conversely, if we have a whole bunch of them and we want to turn them all off, we can click over here, this FX enabled button here, and it'll turn off all of them. So let's listen to this dry with no effects again. Okay, now let's turn on the reverb and just listen to it with the very default setting that it loaded when we loaded that reverb effect. So I click this back on to show that we do want this effect to be processed, and then turn it back on here to show that we're actually going to have all of these effects take effect. So let's listen to it now. So you can see it adds that trailing stuff to it that's nice. And with effects like this that kind of add sound afterwards, when you stop playing the file, Reaper will still play out whatever's been hit through the processor. So if you stop it right here, it'll still be running everything up to this point through the processor here, through the effect. So we can change different things with this if we want to. We can you know, set it to a much bigger reverb sound, which sounds kind of like this. And while it's playing, what we can do is we can go in here and we can change the settings if we want more or less of it. And as you can see, since we turned some of these settings up, it's still trailing along. So that is how to add an effect. Now let's say we want another effect. First off, we're going to take this and turn it back to its standard default patch, just because we don't want that super long reverb. Now if we want to add another one, we just click here or open it back up through the button there. Click the Add button, and we can just add another one. And we'll do something really obvious, a flanger here. Now the flanger effect creates kind of this warble effect. Same thing, we've got our controls up here, we've got our drop-down list of presets, and we've got our ability to control the wet. One thing to point out, though, is that the order that these are in is very important. Do we want it to apply the reverb first and then the flanger, which means it's applying the warble effect to the echo, or do we want to have the flanger first and then the reverb, which means it's echoing the warble? It's real easy to rearrange these. Just click one, move it, drag it, and it'll adjust the others accordingly. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the flanger in front, and just so we can hear the flanger without the reverb, we're going to click the checkbox next to the reverb so only the flanger is in effect now. And now when we listen to it, it sounds like this. We're going to turn the mix down because that's a bit... There we go. Now it's not quite so obvious. And now we'll stop it, we'll turn the reverb back on, and we'll listen to it with both of them. So that's super fun, right? Makes things sound snazzy and different. So yeah, effects are awesome, and it's basically the nuts and bolts of not just making it sound cooler, but a process called mixing, which is, when you have multiple files here and you're kind of getting them all to fit together and make sure each one stands out in the way it should. We're going to get into mixing later on. There's going to be multiple videos on that. One other nice thing about Reaper is that, let's say you set up a whole bunch of effects on this track and you've gone in and you've fine-tuned all the settings and got it just the way you want, and let's say that this is something you're going to be using on other tracks again in the future. Instead of having to set it up each time or copy and paste it, what you can do is you can go to FX here, save FX chain, and type in a name here, like this will be our flange reverb. And then next time we have a track and we want to add that to it, we don't have to copy and paste it or anything. Even if it's a new project, just go to Effects and add FX chain, and find our flange reverb. And when we open it, it'll add not just the effects, but the effects with the specific knob settings that we had last time, which is a nice way to save some time. One thing to keep in mind, though, is this is the type of stuff that's really going to start causing processor trouble if you're running a bunch at the same time. As you can see, it shows your little CPU output down here. And if Reaper has too many effects running at the same time, or if the processor is overloaded, this clock here will start flashing red and you'll start getting the stuttering effect where it's not playing smoothly, and you don't want that. It's really easy to just go crazy with effects and just, have a whole bunch of different instruments and, like 25 effects on each one if you're just going nuts. And there's no way Reaper can process all that in real time, at least, unless you have like a super top-end computer. So it gets down to a question of how do we get around doing that? How do we get Reaper to have all the effects that we need on all the tracks that we need, but still have it process well? The first way we can do it is by kind of grouping tracks together. Now, I'm going to open up another file here. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to delete this track right now. I'm going to show you something else with this file in a minute, but for right now, all you need to know is that we have two tracks here. We've got that same track we just listened to, and we'll solo it so we can hear it by itself. That's all you need to hear because you've heard it tons of times already. And then on top of it, we have this kind of lead guitar track. So let's say that we want to apply effects to these. One way to do it would be to go into each track, add our reverb, and then let's say add a chorus, which is another kind of warble effect, and then add a, let's add a delay on it too, which is more of a repeating effect. And now, so we've got all those effects on here, and then if we want to add them to this track also, we could open it up. We can highlight all these and just right-click. We can go to copy. That's what I want. Copy. We could open up the second one here, and we could right-click and go to paste, and now we have all those effects running on each track. But the problem is that we have all of those effects running on each track. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up both of them here, and I'm just going to show you. So These are all the effects for this top dry guitar 1, and these are all the effects for dry guitar 2. So 6 effects running simultaneously. And if we listen to it, it sounds pretty cool, but there's a much more efficient way to do it in terms of the system memory. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy all these, and then we're just going to remove them. And we're going to remove everything from here too. So now we have no effects on anything. Now what we can do is we're going to click over here in the timeline. We're going to create a new track. We're going to click in here and we're going to call it guitar folder. We're going to move it to very top here. Over here, there's a little folder icon. It's very hard to see, but it turns into a big plus symbol. Now when you click on that, it changes this to a top level folder. You can click it again to make it not a folder track. And what this does is it means that this track is now a folder that holds all this other stuff. You can have own audio here too, but as you see, when I make it a folder track, it kind of shows the shadow of these 2 files combined. Now, you could have as many of these as you want. Let's turn this off so we just have a few. But let's say we've got this track that we want to have a folder with these 2, and then this track we want to have a folder with these 2. Now the problem is if we do it this way, it shows that this is a folder track holding these, this is a folder track holding all of these, so we click this, we go down to the bottom one, click it, and it'll kind of arrange it. You just click around on it and you'll figure out. So it's pretty visually obvious that this one holds these 2, this one holds these 2, but these aren't real tracks anyway right now, so we'll get rid of them. Anyway, so we create a folder track, we put these other 2 tracks in it, and now what we can do is just go into the effects here. For the folder track, paste them in the folder track, and then bam, all we have is one instance of each of these running on the folder track with these 2 files being sent through the folder track. It sounds like this. Pretty cool, right? Now just to kind of show that it doesn't really sound any different, we're going to turn that off, we're going to mute all the effects there, and we're going to put them back on each individual track here. It's exactly the same, but as you can see, we've got our CPU, you know, hovering around 910, 910 there, but if we just have them on this track, it's more at the 3.3, 2.4 level, which means it's using less of the processor power. Yeah, so that's one way to get around some of the problems with running all these effects simultaneously. Is you just make a folder track, you run the effects on that folder, and then have these things go through it instead of running them like 100 instances on 100 different tracks. Another way we could do it. Let's get rid of this folder track here because we don't need it anymore. Let's say that we've got these 2 tracks and we've got the effects running on them, and we know we're not going to change anything on the effects for a while. And we just want Reaper to kind of apply those effects and not have to be running them all in real time. What we can do is we can right-click on a track here. We can go down to Render or Freeze Tracks and click Freeze Tracks to... Hold on, we're going to open it here and do it from here. If we right-click in here and go to freeze track, we can freeze track to stereo up to last selected FX, or up to mono, or to multi-channel or whatever. But basically, if you just click like freeze track to stereo up to last non-offline effects, that means it'll apply every effect that's turned on up until this one that's not. So if this one's turned off, it'll apply these 2. If this one is turned off, it'll just apply that one, all that stuff. So we're going to turn them all on. We're going to close out these dialog windows up here. Right click, go to freeze tracks, and freeze track to stereo up to last non-offline effects. Now what this is going to do is it's going to apply these effects to the track and then turn them off. So it basically changed the actual audio file. So now we hear it with all the effects, but it's not having to run them in real time. Now, let's say later on in the process of making the song, we do want to make a change to it. Like, let's say that we've decided we don't like having as much delay, or we want to get rid of one of the effects that we froze into the track. Just open it back up, right-click, under Freeze Track, go to unfreeze track, and it'll undo all those, turn them back on here so you can make whatever changes you want to, and then refreeze it if you want to do that. So freezing a track is one way to temporarily apply the effects and take them offline. Another way to do it would be to render the track. Now what that does is it's like a more permanent form of freezing the track. You just right click on it, go to render, freeze tracks, and then render tracks to mono stem tracks or render tracks to stereo stem tracks. I usually do stereo just for the sake of it. So if I do this, what it'll do is go through, it'll apply those effects to it, and it'll create a new track with those applied. Now this old track still exists and it's got the effects on. But what it does is it mutes that track. And one thing that's nice about Reaper is in the preferences, you have the ability to tell it that once a track is muted, you want to take these effects out of memory so it's not working with them. So it keeps it here. The downside to rendering is that it's really easy to start getting super cluttered with all these old tracks and new tracks and stuff. But same thing, it applies the effects to them, it turns off the original track, and now we have a new track with the effects applied. The concept behind all this is that it's easier for Reaper to just play an audio file that's just, an audio file than it is for it to play an audio file while it's running it real time through all these effects and applying those effects as it's playing it. So once again, if this thing starts stuttering here and turning red, then you're gonna want to do something to the effects because it's getting bogged down, and either doing it as a folder track or freezing it or rendering it are two of the ways to do that. There's a third way to minimize your effects usage, and that's basically creating a new track with just the effect on it, routing other tracks through it, but that involves track routing, and that's something we're going to get to in a later lesson, so don't worry about that for now. Now, before we close this out, there's one last thing I need to talk about, and that's basically when you want to apply effects versus record them up front. So let me close this guy out. We're not going to save it, and we're actually just going to reload it the way it was originally. So what I have got here is I have got two different versions of two different guitar lines. Now, as you might be able to tell, these two here are basically the same, and these two are basically the same. The difference is that when I recorded these, on these two tracks here, guitar 1, this version I recorded up front without any effects. And with this one, what I did is in my guitar software, I recorded it with the effects already. So I use trailing effects like reverb and stuff to kind of demonstrate a point here. But what you can see is that, I had two tracks here. Let me mute this because it sounds horrible right now. One had digital delay and stuff turned on. The other had digital delay and reverb turned off. So this track here sounds like this. Whereas the dry track sounds without the reverb. Same thing here. It's just the lead line with reverb and without reverb. Now the reason I want to show you this is you need to know when you want to record an effect, just record it into the audio, and when you want to just record a dry track and then add the effect later. The advantage to recording it into the audio on the front end is that now Reaper is just processing this as an audio file. It doesn't have to worry about CPU usage for effects. The downside is that if you want to do any editing to this track, it'll be trickier to have that editing sound transparent and not be obvious. Like if we listen to this guy here, one thing at the end, you'll notice I hit this last chord and then I just let it ring out, and when I stopped playing the chord, I just stopped recording it. So dry, it sounds like this. And then I stopped there, and then I stopped recording there. Now that same part on this, I still had reverb ringing out when I stopped recording, so now all of a sudden that cuts off at the end. Hear how it just drops off there instead of gradually decaying? It's the nice thing about recording it dry and then adding the effect is I can go in here, I can add my reverb to it, And now, when I listen to this track soloed, it doesn't matter that I stopped recording here. I didn't have to wait for all the reverb to ring out before I stopped, because it's applying it real time. It's much smoother. The other thing too is, let's say I wanted to cut out part of this here. Like, let's say this chord here, I don't want. So we're going to solo this track. I'm going to zoom in on it. I'm going to just do some rough little cut here where at the beginning I hit S to split it. Then right before the next chord I hit S to split it. Click this guy, erase it, and then drag this guy over until it matches. Now, if I listen to it like this, without reverb, it sounds like this. Okay, and if I turn on the reverb, it sounds fine. Whereas if I do the same thing up here, since the reverb is already built in, even though I cut this chord out, this part here, the audio file itself still has the reverb from that chord ringing out over it, even though I've cut the chord out, just because it's part of it. So we're going to hear some of that chord bleed through. Especially if I line it up properly so it sounds better. It doesn't sound nearly as clean to the ear. I'm kind of demonstrating that too in these files here. So you can see this, the dark green bar represents the actual audio file, and the blurry green bar represents the diffused reverb. So this is a normal one-track thing where it's got audio and then reverb trailing after it, which is fine. Now, if we look at what happens if we add a second track, like let's say we want to punch in and out and record a part over it, if we've been recording with reverb in the source file, hear that first line, it'll cut off the reverb from the first chord ringing out and have no reverb because there was no audio. And then when we punch back into the top track, it'll cut off the trailing reverb from the second chord. And that's not what we want. That doesn't sound natural. That sounds like just rough editing. You can see close up here, same thing. It just cuts it off, and you don't want it that way. Now, if we do it properly, if we record this dry and then add the reverb afterwards, you can see that the light green line here in the close-up, it actually trails the audio that's playing instead of just being pre-recorded in and being cut off at weird points. So all this is just to say, pay attention to how you set up your effects. If you want to record it in from the beginning, like if you're recording guitar through an amp, you know, do you want to have that delay pedal turned on, or do you want to just record it without delay and then do the delay in Reaper here? My personal recommendation is record it as dry as you can. You know, if you have distortion or something on your guitar, record it however you need to there, but save all the real noticeable effects for when you get into Reaper. So once again, thank you for watching. I'm Viking Guitar, and this is Viking Guitar University. Be sure to check out www.vikingguitaruniversity.com for more tutorials on playing guitar and home recording and all sorts of cool stuff like that. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep the world metal.